The conclave is a stunning spectacle watched by Catholics around the world that will ultimately decide the new leader of the church. But already there have been some cardinals who are clear frontrunners.
With the death of Pope Francis, who are some of the names, you mentioned Cardinal Sarah, who are some of the names that you'd be looking for the conclave to really consider here to bridge this gap that we've seen, that we're talking about, that you've spent your entire career talking about, between the modern church and the rise of the ascendant traditional church?
Well, I think there's probably about 20 cardinals that have a good chance. There's a saying in Rome, he who enters the conclave, a pope, leaves a cardinal. That is, the cardinals who have probably the most people behind them going into the conclave tend not to be elected pope. There's often usually there's two polarizing candidates, and you need a 2/3 majority to elect a pope, and so it's very hard to reach a 2/3 majority. And so what happens is one side lets go of their candidate and the other side let go of their candidate, and they find someone that they can all vote for, and that's the one who becomes pope. And you have a good graphic there on the screen of the Papabile. I think for traditional Catholics, they're looking at a few cardinals. We already mentioned Cardinal Sarah. He's from Africa. He's the third from the left on there. He worked in the Vatican for the Pope on sacraments and the liturgy. He's not like a hardcore traditionalist, like Latin Mass only all the time, but he was tolerant of it. He said even in the new Mass, the vernacular Mass, there should be ad orientem. He's more of an advocate for communion on the hand, communion rails, the aesthetics of what you would see in Catholicism before 1965. You can think of any great Catholic movie you've seen, like The Bells of St. Mary or The Cardinal or any of those old movies. That aesthetic, and it's not just an aesthetic, it's a theology, but what you see there, Cardinal Sarah, and you have to remember the African Christians in many of these places, some of the African Christians go back, like in Egypt, all the way back to the 1st century, St. Mark, but most of them were evangelized in the last 100 years. So their great parents, their great grandparents, they were not baptized. They were not Christian. And so when they received Christianity, they received it in the traditional Latin rite. And I have a friend who said his parents and grandparents were very disappointed in the 60s and 70s. They had memorized all the Latin chants. And the new missionaries came, the kind of modern liberal guys, like, no, you got to beat on these drums. You got to be Africans during Mass. And they're like, no, we want to chant the Latin. So that's kind of their background. I think Cardinal Robert Sarah represents that. Another cardinal that I think is more of a moderate but somewhat conservative cardinal is Cardinal Peter Erdo. He is the cardinal from Hungary.
From Hungary, right?
Many of us are familiar, with the conservative reforms in Hungary, trying to raise birth rates, trying to promote families. He represents the old guard of Europe, but he's not liberal, and he's more of an administrator. He's not really known for being a theologian or writing, theological treatises, but he is known for being more conservative. And I think he would not only be tolerant of traditional Catholics, but he would give them, rights and freedom and expansion. So I see him as a very likely candidate, especially if they go into the conclave with two extremes. I can see them coming to him because he's moderate to right, and I hate to use these political terms, but just for the sake of brevity on your show, he's moderate to right, and he's European, and there is kind of this idea that we need to kind of keep things rooted in Europe.